Welcome to Sleepy Dungeons. Tonight, we unravel the ancient mysteries that still echo across time. We journey back to 1200 BC, where the legendary Trojan War unfolded, a story of gods, heroes, and the fall of a mighty city. The tale of Troy is one of the most captivating stories in human history, a blend of myth and reality that has survived for thousands of years. The city of Troy, known for its magnificent walls and grand history, has been immortalized in the epic poetry of Homer and retold in countless ways, from ancient texts to modern movies. But what is the truth behind this legendary city? Was it a powerful empire that fell in a single night, or is there more to the story than what has been passed down through the ages? The city of Troy, with its striking location and strategic importance, was at the heart of an ancient world full of intrigue, ambition, and conflict. Situated near the Aegean Sea, at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, it was an ideal place for trade, cultural exchange, and military dominance. But the city's fall, told to us through the myth of the Trojan War, has remained a symbol of tragedy, of a once great civilization brought low by love, betrayal, and the wrath of the gods. Today, Troy's story still fascinates historians, archaeologists, and storytellers alike. But what do we really know about it? And more importantly, what truths lie beneath the legends? Tonight, we dive deep into the story of Troy, not just the myth, but the history. We'll explore the origins of the city, its rise to power, the legendary figures who shaped its destiny, and the forces that led to its downfall. The ancient ruins of Troy were uncovered in the 19th century, revealing a civilization far older than once believed. Was Troy merely a mythological city, or was it a real place with its own complex history and people? We'll explore these questions and more, seeking to understand not just how Troy fell, but why it matters to us today. As we travel back through time, let the rhythm of this story guide you into calmness. Picture yourself drifting through the ancient world of Troy, where gods and mortals mingled, where warriors fought and kings ruled. Allow the ebb and flow of history to soothe your thoughts and bring peace to your mind. Let the tale of Troy be a gentle lullaby, guiding you into restful sleep and good dreams. Troy's story begins long before the Great War that made it famous. We'll take a journey through its history, from its origins to the time when the Great Walls were built and its people flourished. We'll witness the triumphs of its leaders and the rise of its heroes, whose names have been immortalized in myth. But we'll also uncover the cracks that began to appear, both within the city and beyond its walls, that led to its ultimate destruction. In this journey, we'll uncover the truths behind the legends. We'll explore the city's geographic advantages, its economic rise, and the vibrant culture that defined the Trojans. We'll examine the myths that shaped the identity of Troy, and the people whose actions would change the course of history. From the moment of its founding to the final night of its destruction, we'll trace the events that led to the fall of one of the ancient world's greatest cities. You've already followed this far, why not subscribe now? That way, you'll never miss another haunting journey into the forgotten corners of history. Let's uncover the story of Troy together, starting with the very foundations of this great city. The story of Troy is as ancient as the stones that lie in ruins on the plains of Archaeological in modern-day Turkey. To understand how this city came to prominence, we must first step back and examine the land upon which it was built. Situated at the crossroads of two continents, Europe and Asia, Troy commanded a position that would later be instrumental to its success. The city sat on a hill overlooking the Dardanelles, an important strait that connected the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara. This geographical advantage gave Troy control over trade routes and access to a wealth of resources, making it a powerful force in the ancient world. The region surrounding Troy was rich in fertile land, ideal for growing crops such as wheat, barley, and olives. The abundance of natural resources allowed Troy to thrive in ways that many other ancient cities could not. The nearby mountains provided timber for construction, while the rivers flowing from the hills ensured that the land was nourished and capable of sustaining a growing population. The climate was temperate, with hot summers and mild winters, creating an environment that encouraged agriculture and trade. The Trojans, as they would later be called, were masters of utilizing their environment to their advantage. As the centuries passed, early settlements began to form around the area. The land, rich in resources, attracted people from all over the ancient world. Small communities began to settle along the Dardanelles, establishing farms and villages that would eventually grow into a major city-state. But it wasn't just the land and resources that made Troy successful. It was the people who called it home. From the very beginning, the inhabitants of this region were fiercely determined, resourceful, and innovative. The Trojans knew how to make the most of their surroundings, building their homes, tools, and weapons with the materials at hand. These early settlements were the foundation upon which Troy would be built. As people began to settle and cultivate the land, they developed systems of trade, governance, and culture that would later define Troy. The earliest phases of Troy's growth were marked by the establishment of small towns and villages that were bound together by mutual interests in trade, defense, and survival. Over time, these settlements coalesced into a single city, a city that would become the center of a powerful and prosperous civilization. Troy's rise to power was not just due to its geographical location and natural resources, but also because of the leadership and vision of its people. The city was built upon the foundation of strong, organized leadership, and as Troy grew, so too did its influence. The Trojans were not only skilled farmers and traders, but they were also fierce warriors. Their military prowess was central to their survival and success. As they expanded, they built strong fortifications to protect themselves from invaders. The walls of Troy, which would later become legendary, were constructed with precision and care, designed to withstand even the most determined attacks. The city became a fortress, its people bound together by the need to protect their land, their homes, and their way of life. As Troy grew in power, it began to attract the attention of other civilizations. Neighboring city-states and empires, seeing Troy's potential and its wealth, sought to make alliances or wage war against it. Troy's strategic position made it a target for conquest, but the city was well defended, and its leaders were skilled in diplomacy and warfare. The Trojans had learned to balance their military strength with shrewd political maneuvering. They knew when to fight and when to negotiate, understanding that sometimes the best way to protect their interests was through careful diplomacy. Trade was also a major factor in Troy's rise to power. The city's position along important trade routes meant that merchants and traders from across the ancient world passed through its gates. These trade routes brought Troy luxury goods, exotic spices, metals, and textiles, items that were highly prized by the Trojans. In return, Troy exported its own goods, including high-quality pottery, weapons, and textiles, establishing a reputation as a center of trade and commerce. The city flourished, becoming a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and technologies. But it wasn't just wealth and military power that made Troy great. The city also became known for its artistic and cultural achievements. The Trojans were skilled craftsmen, and their work in pottery, metalwork, and textiles was renowned throughout the ancient world. They also developed a rich religious and cultural tradition, which became deeply embedded in the city's identity. The gods and goddesses of Troy played a central role in the lives of its people, and their influence was seen in every aspect of Trojan society, from the arts to politics. Troy's prosperity also led to the development of its architecture. The city became a marvel of engineering, with grand palaces, temples, and public buildings that showcased the wealth and power of its rulers. The most famous of these structures were the walls of Troy, which were said to be impregnable. These walls became a symbol of the city's strength and resilience, and their construction was an early indicator of the Trojan commitment to defense and security. As Troy grew in power and influence, its leaders began to establish dynasties that would rule the city for generations. The royal family of Troy, particularly the line of King Priam, became one of the most respected and feared families in the ancient world. Priam's reign marked a high point for the city, and his leadership played a key role in maintaining Troy's power. Under his rule, the city saw prosperity, stability, and military strength, with Troy becoming one of the most influential city-states of the ancient Mediterranean world. However, as with all great civilizations, Troy's success was not destined to last forever. Even as the city reached the height of its power, cracks began to form. Rivalries within Troy, combined with growing tensions from external forces, began to erode the city's stability. The very wealth and power that had made Troy great would eventually contribute to its downfall. But for now, the city stood strong, its people united under a common purpose, to defend their land, their city, and their way of life. In this chapter, we've seen the early rise of Troy, a city shaped by its geography, its people, and its leadership. From humble beginnings as a collection of small settlements, Troy grew into a powerful city-state that dominated the surrounding region. Through trade, military prowess, and strategic alliances, Troy became one of the greatest civilizations of its time. The walls of Troy, the fortified defenses that protected its citizens, stood as a testament to its strength and resilience. But as Troy reached the peak of its power, the winds of change began to blow, and the seeds of its eventual downfall were already being sown. The origins of Troy have long been shrouded in myth and legend, with stories of gods and heroes intertwining with historical facts to create a narrative that is both compelling and elusive. According to ancient Greek mythology, the city of Troy was founded by the god Dardanus, who came from Italy and settled on the shores of the Dardanelles. Dardanus was said to be a son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and his arrival marked the beginning of Troy's rise to prominence. His descendants, known as the Dardanians, were said to have established a kingdom that would eventually become the mighty city of Troy. But the myths surrounding Troy's founding did not end with Dardanus. Another legend tells of the great hero Elos, the son of Tros, after whom the city was named. Elos is said to have founded the city, establishing its first walls and creating the foundation for the mighty civilization that would follow. His son, Laomedon, would later rule Troy and strengthen its defenses, but it was under the reign of Priam, many generations later, that Troy would reach its zenith. These early stories of gods and heroes shaped the identity of Troy, with each generation of rulers adding their own mythological layer to the city's history. While mythology provides the most well-known explanations for Troy's founding, archaeology has offered a more grounded understanding of the city's origins. Excavations at the ancient site of Troy, located at Azarlik in modern-day Turkey, have uncovered evidence of human settlements that date back to the Bronze Age. These discoveries have shed light on the early history of Troy and helped confirm that the city was, indeed, a real place, rather than purely a product of myth. The layers of ruins found at the site reveal a civilization that spanned centuries, with each layer representing a different phase of Troy's growth. The earliest settlements at Troy date back to around 300 BC, long before the legendary Trojan War. These early inhabitants of the region were not yet the powerful city builders that would later make Troy famous, but they laid the foundation for the city's eventual rise. The archaeological evidence suggests that the first inhabitants of Troy were primarily farmers, living in small villages and using the fertile land around them to cultivate crops. They built simple dwellings and used basic tools, but over time, they developed more advanced techniques in pottery, metallurgy, and agriculture. This gradual progress set the stage for the growth of Troy into a powerful city-state. As the centuries passed, Troy's settlement expanded and began to evolve. The city grew from small, isolated communities into a more unified and organized society. By the 2nd millennium BC, Troy was becoming a significant force in the ancient world. The city's strategic location along trade routes made it a key player in the economic and political landscape of the Mediterranean. The Trojans began to trade with neighboring civilizations, exchanging goods such as pottery, textiles, and precious metals. This exchange of goods and ideas helped spur Troy's growth and development, and by the time of the Trojan War, the city was a thriving metropolis with a rich culture and a powerful military. But even as Troy's prosperity grew, its founding myths continued to shape its identity. The Trojans believed that they were descended from gods, and this divine ancestry gave them a sense of pride and legitimacy. The city's rulers, like Priam, were seen as divinely chosen leaders, and their authority was bolstered by the belief that they had been appointed by the gods to rule over Troy. This belief in divine favor also played a central role in the Trojan War, as the gods themselves were said to have taken sides in the conflict. The idea of the gods' involvement in the fate of Troy added a layer of complexity to the city's history, making it difficult to separate myth from reality. The myths surrounding Troy were not only about its origins but also about the heroes who were said to have lived and fought there. The most famous of these heroes is Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy, who stood as a symbol of courage, loyalty, and honor. Hector's bravery in battle, especially during the Trojan War, made him a legendary figure in Greek and Trojan culture alike. His death at the hands of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes, is one of the most tragic moments in the Iliad. Hector's story became a central part of Troy's identity, symbolizing the city's resistance against overwhelming odds. The legend of the Trojan War itself, with its complex web of heroes, gods, and conflicts, has been told and retold in countless forms. But the origins of the war are rooted in the myth of the Judgment of Paris, a story that has become synonymous with the cause of the war. According to the myth, Paris, a prince of Troy, was chosen to decide which of the three goddesses, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite, was the fairest. Each goddess offered Paris a bribe, and when he chose Aphrodite, she promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. This act of choosing Aphrodite over the other goddesses set in motion the chain of events that would lead to the Trojan War. As the gods and goddesses continued to intervene in the affairs of mortals, Troy became embroiled in a conflict that would ultimately lead to its destruction. The myth of the Trojan War, like many ancient stories, blends the divine with the human, the real with the imagined. But within these myths lies a deeper truth. Troy was a city of great significance, with a rich cultural heritage and a powerful military presence. It was a city that existed not only in the realm of legend but in the real world as well, and its story continues to captivate us today. Through the myths and archaeological evidence, we see how the city of Troy was built on both divine and mortal foundations. The city's origin, steeped in mythology, continues to be a source of fascination, but it is the blend of myth and reality that gives Troy its enduring appeal. As we look back on the ancient city, we are reminded of the legends that have shaped our understanding of the past and the people who lived there. As Troy flourished, its people began to innovate in ways that would set them apart from other civilizations in the ancient world. The first steps toward a more advanced society were seen in the development of agriculture, a practice that would form the backbone of Troy's economic stability. The fertile plains surrounding Troy allowed the Trojans to cultivate crops that sustained their growing population, including wheat, barley, and lentils. This abundance of food allowed the city to support a larger population, which in turn created a demand for trade and craftsmanship. Agriculture alone, however, was not enough to ensure the long-term success of Troy. The Trojans soon realized that to continue thriving, they needed to improve their methods of production and expand their trade networks. Their ability to adapt and innovate in agriculture, as well as other fields, became one of the key factors that propelled Troy forward. They were also skilled in metallurgy, using copper and tin to create tools, weapons, and ornaments that were highly sought after by neighboring civilizations. The ability to craft high-quality goods allowed Troy to establish itself as a central hub for trade, drawing merchants and traders from far and wide. As trade flourished, the Trojans began to develop a more complex economy. They exchanged goods with civilizations across the Mediterranean, from the Mycenaeans to the Egyptians. These trading relationships not only brought wealth to Troy but also exposed the city to new ideas, technologies, and customs. This cultural exchange had a profound impact on Troy, influencing everything from art and architecture to warfare and social organization. The advancement of trade also brought about innovations in shipbuilding. Troy's position along the Dardanelles made it an ideal location for maritime trade, and the Trojans became skilled sailors and shipbuilders. The construction of their ships enabled them to transport goods across the Aegean Sea, strengthening their influence and trade connections. These ships were not just vessels for trade, they were also tools of war. The Trojan navy, though not as large as the fleets of their Greek counterparts, was nonetheless formidable, providing Troy with an important military advantage in times of conflict. While agriculture and trade laid the foundation for Troy's prosperity, it was the advancements in craftsmanship and the arts that truly defined the city. The Trojans were renowned for their pottery, which was often intricately designed and highly prized by other civilizations. They also excelled in metalworking, crafting weapons and tools that were both functional and beautiful. These craftsmen were highly skilled, and their work became a symbol of Troy's wealth and sophistication. Socially, the Trojans were organized into distinct classes, with a clear hierarchy that was reflective of their values and traditions. At the top of the social structure were the rulers and the nobility, whose wealth and power were derived from their control over land and resources. The royal family of Troy, particularly the line of Priam, was seen as divinely ordained, with the kings and queens holding both political and religious power. Below the nobility were the artisans, traders, and farmers, those who made Troy function on a day-to-day basis. While the common people had less power and influence than the aristocracy, they were nonetheless integral to the city's success. Religious life was also a central part of Trojan society. The Trojans worshipped a variety of gods and goddesses, with each deity overseeing different aspects of their lives. The chief god of Troy was Apollo, who was associated with the sun, music, and prophecy. Other gods, such as Hera, Athena, and Poseidon, played important roles in the Trojan pantheon. These gods were not distant figures, they were believed to interact with mortals on a regular basis, offering guidance and assistance in times of need. The Trojans built grand temples and altars to honor their gods, and religious rituals were an integral part of daily life. The influence of the gods was felt in every aspect of Trojan culture, from the decisions of the kings to the actions of ordinary people. With the city's economic, military, and social systems firmly in place, the Trojans began to experience a golden age. Under the leadership of King Priam, Troy reached the peak of its power and influence. Priam was a wise and respected ruler, known for his fairness and his ability to maintain peace within the city and its surrounding territories. His reign marked a period of stability, during which Troy's walls were strengthened, its trade routes expanded, and its culture flourished. The city became a beacon of civilization in the ancient world, attracting scholars, artists, and philosophers who sought to learn from the Trojans' advanced ways of life. The city's wealth and power were reflected in its architecture. Troy was home to grand palaces, temples, and public buildings that were designed to showcase the city's prestige. The walls of Troy, which would later become legendary, were a testament to the city's commitment to defense. These walls, built with massive stone blocks, were nearly impregnable, offering protection from invaders. The city's layout was carefully planned, with streets that radiated outward from the central citadel, creating an organized and efficient urban environment. Troy's influence also extended beyond its borders. The city established strong alliances with neighboring civilizations, forging diplomatic ties that allowed it to thrive in a competitive and often hostile world. These alliances, though not without their challenges, helped to secure Troy's position as one of the most powerful cities in the Mediterranean. As trade and diplomacy flourished, so too did Troy's reputation as a center of culture, art, and military power. But, as with all great civilizations, the seeds of Troy's decline were already being sown. While the city appeared invincible, the internal and external forces that would later contribute to its downfall were beginning to take shape. The Trojans, for all their success and wealth, were not immune to the same flaws that plagued other ancient civilizations. Corruption, internal strife, and external threats all began to chip away at the city's once immovable foundations. In this chapter, we have seen how Troy's innovations in agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship helped lay the foundation for the city's rise to power. From its early beginnings as a small settlement to its peak as a dominant city-state, Troy flourished due to its strategic location, resourcefulness, and leadership. The advancements in shipbuilding, pottery, metalworking, and social organization contributed to the city's prosperity and its lasting legacy. Yet, even in the midst of this golden age, the cracks in Troy's foundation were beginning to show. The very wealth and power that had made Troy great would soon become the very factors that would lead to its downfall. As the Trojans basked in the glory of their prosperity, the strength of their city rested not just in its walls or wealth, but in its leadership. The rise of Troy as a dominant civilization was largely due to the powerful rulers who shaped its destiny. At the forefront of these rulers was King Priam, the figurehead of Troy during its golden age. Under his rule, the city reached unparalleled heights, its influence spreading far and wide across the Mediterranean world. Priam's reign symbolized the peak of Trojan power, but it was also a time when the seeds of their eventual downfall were planted, hidden beneath layers of ambition, pride, and intrigue. Priam was known for his wisdom and diplomatic acumen. His leadership kept Troy stable in a time of immense external pressures and internal challenges. Priam's court was one of the most prestigious in the ancient world, attracting skilled artisans, philosophers, and warriors. The king's decisions were paramount, shaping not only the fate of his city but also the course of events that would determine the future of Troy. He was deeply respected by his people, but even more so by his allies and enemies alike. It was said that Priam was blessed by the gods themselves, a divine protector of Troy's destiny. His rule saw the strengthening of the city's defenses and the flourishing of its culture, but despite his power, there were cracks within the city that he could neither see nor avoid. Priam's legacy was also defined by his children, each of whom played a crucial role in the story of Troy. Of all his sons, Hector was perhaps the most beloved and respected. A warrior unmatched in skill and courage, Hector was the heart of Troy's military might. His valor on the battlefield earned him admiration even from the enemy, and his dedication to his people made him a symbol of Troy's enduring spirit. Hector's death, at the hands of the Greek hero Achilles, would become one of the most tragic events in the Trojan War, marking the city's descent into ruin. Alongside Hector was Paris, another of Priam's sons, whose actions would unknowingly set the stage for the fall of Troy. Paris was not a warrior like Hector, he was a prince of a more contemplative nature. Yet, his fateful decision to abduct Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta, would spark the fire of war that consumed Troy. Paris' decision, influenced by the gods' will, was a catalyst for the events that would follow, the 10 years of siege, the fall of the great city, and the destruction of his own family's legacy. The leadership of Priam, Hector, and Paris was both a strength and a vulnerability for Troy. The heroic deeds and noble virtues of these figures created a powerful narrative of Troy's greatness, but it also created an overconfidence in their invincibility. Troy's leaders, though wise and capable, failed to foresee the true nature of the threats that loomed on the horizon. Their focus on military strength and the defense of their city, while admirable, blinded them to the growing tensions and the brewing storm that was about to break over the walls of Troy. The leaders of Troy were not the only ones whose actions shaped the city's destiny. Throughout its history, Troy had been a city of warriors, each one playing a key role in the city's defense and its cultural identity. The Trojan army, led by Hector, was renowned for its strength and discipline. The warriors of Troy were known for their courage, often fighting side by side with the gods themselves. In battle, they fought with a sense of unity and honor, believing that their cause was just and that the gods had blessed them. This belief in divine favor, however, proved to be a double-edged sword. The gods were not always as kind as the Trojans believed, and their interference in mortal affairs would prove to be a decisive factor in the outcome of the Trojan War. The Trojans' military might was not without its challenges. The Greeks, with their own legendary warriors such as Achilles and Odysseus, were formidable opponents. The conflict between the two civilizations had begun long before the war itself, with both sides vying for dominance in the region. The Greeks, united under the leadership of Agamemnon, saw Troy as a prize to be claimed. The city's wealth, its strategic location, and its power were too great a temptation to resist. The Greeks were determined to breach Troy's walls, to take the city and claim its treasures for themselves. But Troy, under Priam and Hector's leadership, was equally determined to defend its people and its sovereignty. As the war began, both sides knew that the conflict would be long and brutal. It was a war not just for territory, but for honor, glory, and survival. The gods watched from afar, each one taking sides and intervening at critical moments. For the Trojans, it was a battle for their very existence, for the preservation of their city and way of life. For the Greeks, it was a battle for revenge and conquest, fueled by the abduction of Helen and a desire to punish Troy for its defiance. But even as the war raged on, there was a sense of inevitability. The great walls of Troy, once believed to be impregnable, would not be enough to withstand the combined might of the Greek forces. While Hector led the charge for Troy's defense, Priam's role as a leader became more complex. As the war dragged on, Priam found himself torn between his duty to protect his people and the realization that the gods had turned their favor away from Troy. The once proud king, so certain of his divine protection, began to sense that the end was near. But even in the face of imminent defeat, Priam remained steadfast in his role as leader, refusing to abandon his city or his people. Troy's leadership, once a source of immense pride and strength, now became a double-edged sword. The very qualities that had made Troy great, its sense of unity, its divine belief in its invincibility, had now become its greatest weakness. The Trojans, though heroic and courageous, were blinded by their own pride and their unwavering belief in their superiority. And as the war dragged on, it became increasingly clear that Troy could not hold out forever. The walls that had once stood as symbols of strength now seemed inadequate against the relentless tide of Greek forces and the will of the gods. In this chapter, we have explored the leadership of Troy, from Priam's wise rule to the heroic actions of Hector and the fateful decision of Paris. The strength and unity of Troy were built on the leadership of its rulers, but it was this very leadership that led the city into a path of destruction. The Trojans' belief in their invincibility, driven by divine favor and their own pride, blinded them to the growing threats that surrounded them. In the end, it was the heroic leaders of Troy who, despite their best efforts, were unable to prevent the inevitable fall of their great city. As the years of siege wore on, the Greeks' determination to bring Troy to its knees intensified. The great city, once a symbol of power and wealth, found itself surrounded by the relentless forces of the Mycenaean army. Yet, despite the prolonged siege and the overwhelming odds, Troy held steadfast. The city's formidable walls, built with such care and precision, continued to stand tall, defying the Greek assault. The Trojans, led by their noble heroes, defended their land with courage and strength, never once contemplating surrender. It was a war that seemed as though it would never end, each side locked in a battle of wills, each waiting for the other to break. Troy's resilience in the face of this relentless siege was not merely a testament to the strength of its walls, but to the resolve of its people. Despite the heavy toll the war had taken on their resources and morale, the Trojans refused to give up. The warriors, the farmers, and the artisans all played their part in the defense of their homeland, reinforcing the sense of unity that had always been central to their identity. The people of Troy, believing that the gods were on their side, fought not just for their city, but for their very survival. Yet, the passage of time brought with it a slow, creeping despair. For the Greeks, the prolonged siege of Troy had become a battle of attrition. Every year that passed without a clear victory made the Greeks more desperate. The Greeks had many warriors, but they were beginning to feel the effects of the war's length. Food supplies dwindled, and the strain on their forces grew. The siege had become a bitter and costly affair, with no end in sight. The Greeks, led by the ever-strategic Odysseus, knew they needed to find a way to break the stalemate, to outwit the Trojans and finally capture the city that had eluded them for so long. The answer to their plight came in the form of a cunning plan, a deception so bold that it would change the course of the war. It was during the 10th year of the siege, when the Trojans had begun to relax their guard, that the Greeks devised their greatest trick, the creation of the infamous wooden horse. This great structure, crafted from wood and hollowed out to house a small group of elite Greek soldiers, was left outside the gates of Troy as a supposed offering to the gods. The Greeks, having pretended to abandon the siege entirely, sailed away with the majority of their forces, leaving only a small group of soldiers hidden within the horse. The Trojans, exhausted by the long war and hopeful that it might be over, believed the Greeks had finally given up and left. In a moment of misguided triumph, they brought the wooden horse into the heart of their city as a symbol of victory and peace. The night of celebration began as the Trojans opened the gates and invited the horse into the city, unaware of the soldiers hidden inside. They lit torches, feasting and rejoicing, thinking the war had come to an end. But as night fell and the city slept, the Greek soldiers inside the horse emerged, quietly unlocking the gates for the rest of the Greek army, which had secretly returned under the cover of darkness. What followed was a night of devastation. The Trojans, caught off guard and unable to defend themselves, were slaughtered. The Greeks poured into the city, overwhelming the defenders who were still recovering from their celebrations. The once proud city of Troy, with its towering walls and prosperous streets, was reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. The fall of Troy was swift, brutal, and final. The Greeks had won, but at an immeasurable cost to the Trojans. The city, its heroes, and its people were destroyed in the blink of an eye, erased from the map of history. The immediate aftermath of the fall of Troy was marked by chaos and tragedy. The city's leaders, Priam, Hector, and Paris, were either killed or captured, and the once vibrant city was left in ruin. The women and children were taken as slaves, and the treasures of Troy, accumulated over centuries, were plundered. The once mighty civilization was left in ashes, its glory nothing more than a memory. Troy's legacy, however, lived on. Its story would be passed down through generations, immortalized in songs and tales that would keep the memory of the city alive long after its destruction. The Greeks, though victorious, were not without their own losses. The war had taken a heavy toll on them as well, and the gods, who had intervened so often throughout the conflict, continued to play a role in the aftermath. For Odysseus, the mastermind behind the wooden horse and the fall of Troy, his journey home would become one of the most famous adventures in Greek mythology. His long, arduous voyage back to Ithaca, filled with trials and challenges, would be immortalized in the epic Odyssey. But for the Trojans, there would be no such journey. The fall of Troy marked the end of their great civilization and the beginning of a long period of silence. In the years that followed, Troy would be forgotten by most, its memories slipping into the realm of myth. Yet, its ruins would remain, silently bearing witness to the once great civilization that had stood at the crossroads of the ancient world. Archaeologists, in later centuries, would uncover the remains of the city, sparking debates about the truth of Troy's existence and the events that had led to its downfall. The mysteries of Troy, its origins, its heroes, and its tragic end, would continue to captivate the minds of historians and storytellers alike. In this chapter, we have seen how Troy's military strength and resilience were ultimately undone by cunning and deception. The city's heroic defense, led by its valiant leaders, could not withstand the Greeks' strategic ingenuity. The fall of Troy, though predicted by many, was still a shock to the people who had lived through the long years of siege. It was a fall that came not from the strength of the enemy, but from their ability to outwit the Trojans and deceive them into believing they were victorious. The wooden horse, once a symbol of triumph, became the tool of Troy's destruction, bringing an end to the legendary city that had once stood so proudly. The fall of Troy was not just a military defeat, it was the destruction of a civilization that had flourished for centuries. As the Greeks poured into the city, Troy's once majestic walls crumbled, and its vibrant streets were filled with the sounds of destruction. The gods, who had once played such an active role in the lives of the Trojans, seemed distant and uncaring in the face of the city's annihilation. The grand palaces that had stood as symbols of Troy's power were now reduced to rubble, and the treasures of the city, gathered over generations, were looted and carried away by the Greek victors. But while the physical city of Troy was destroyed, its legacy endured. The stories of its heroes, its gods, and its tragic end would echo through the ages. Even as the Greeks returned to their homeland, laden with spoils of war, the tale of Troy's fall continued to captivate the imagination of those who would come after. The ruins of the city, though silent now, would become a symbol of the fleeting nature of power and the enduring strength of myth. For the survivors of Troy, the fall of their city marked the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. Many of Troy's greatest warriors were dead, and the surviving citizens were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. The women and children who had not been killed or taken as slaves faced an uncertain future. Some of the Trojan nobles, like Aeneas, managed to escape the city before its final destruction. Aeneas, the son of the goddess Aphrodite and the Trojan prince Anchises, became one of the most important figures in the aftermath of Troy's fall. He would go on to lead a group of survivors on a journey that would eventually bring them to Italy, where they would establish the foundations of what would become the Roman Empire. Aeneas' journey, as told in the Aeneid by the poet Virgil, became a symbol of hope and resilience. The Trojans, though exiled and scattered, would rise again. Their descendants would go on to create a new civilization, one that would surpass Troy in power and influence. But for the Trojans who remained in the aftermath of the war, their fate was sealed. The once proud city had been reduced to ruins, and the people who had once called it home were now exiles, forced to wander the world in search of a new home. The fall of Troy also marked the end of an era. The ancient world, once defined by city-states like Troy, was changing. The rise of new empires, such as that of the Mycenaeans, would shift the balance of power in the Mediterranean. The Trojan War, once fought for love and honor, had become a distant memory, its heroes fading into legend. The gods who had watched over Troy, once revered as protectors, were now seen as capricious beings who played with the lives of mortals for their own amusement. The Trojan War had been a brutal reminder of the fragility of human existence, of how even the mightiest civilizations could fall when their people were divided, their gods turned away, and their enemies united. Yet, even in its destruction, Troy had a lasting impact on the world. The legacy of Troy would continue to shape the cultures that followed. The stories of the Trojan War, particularly those told by Homer and later by Virgil, became foundational texts for Greek and Roman culture. The myth of the Trojan Horse, the heroism of Hector, the tragic love story of Paris and Helen, these stories became part of the fabric of Western civilization, influencing art, literature, and philosophy for centuries to come. Troy also left behind a physical legacy. The ruins of the city, located at Azarlik in modern-day Turkey, were rediscovered in the 19th century by the German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann. His excavations revealed that there had indeed been a city at the site that bore striking similarities to the descriptions found in the ancient texts. While the exact nature of Troy's historical existence remains a topic of debate, the discovery of the ruins served to validate the ancient stories, providing evidence that the city, its people, and its fate were not entirely the products of myth. The ruins of Troy have since become a symbol of the enduring power of memory, of how even in the face of destruction, the past continues to influence the present. Troy's fall also had a profound impact on the Greeks. Although they emerged victorious from the war, the Greek victors paid a heavy price. The gods, who had played such a significant role in the war, were not pleased with the Greeks' triumph. After the sack of Troy, the Greek forces faced a series of misfortunes that delayed their return home. In Homer's Odyssey, we learn of the trials and tribulations faced by Odysseus as he tried to make his way back to Ithaca. The gods, angered by the Greeks' actions during the war, made their journey home long and perilous. The moral of this story was clear: the gods could bring both glory and ruin, and their favor was as fleeting as human life itself. For the Trojans, however, the fall of their city was the end of their story, at least for those who had lived through it. The Trojans were no longer a people of power and influence. Their city was gone, their warriors slain, and their homes reduced to dust. What remained was the story of Troy, its glory, its downfall, and its lasting influence on the world. The myth of Troy, like the city itself, would never truly disappear. It would continue to live on in the hearts and minds of those who sought to understand the nature of power, pride, and destiny. In this chapter, we have seen how the fall of Troy, while a moment of devastation and loss, also marked the beginning of a lasting legacy. The city's destruction did not mean the end of its story. The Trojans, though defeated, would rise again in the form of their descendants, and the story of their fall would continue to shape the cultures that followed. The myths of Troy, once thought to be mere stories, became a foundational part of Western civilization, and the ruins of the city, uncovered centuries later, serve as a reminder of the enduring power of the past. The fall of Troy, tragic as it was, became a legend that would echo through time. As the centuries passed, the memory of Troy continued to shape the cultures that came after its destruction. The fall of Troy was not just a war, it was a profound loss that resonated deeply within the psyche of the ancient world. While Troy itself lay in ruins, its influence lived on in the stories, the heroes, and the lessons that its tale imparted. For the Greeks, the Trojan War became a foundational myth, a tale that both justified their own actions and offered moral lessons about the complexities of war, pride, and fate. The Trojans, though defeated, were remembered not just as victims, but as symbols of resistance, courage, and sacrifice. One of the most enduring aspects of Troy's legacy is the way it shaped Greek culture. The stories of Troy were woven into the fabric of Greek identity, with the Iliad and the Odyssey serving as the cornerstone of Greek literature. These epics, written by the poet Homer, not only chronicled the events of the Trojan War but also explored the human condition, love, honor, revenge, and the wrath of the gods. The figures of Hector, Achilles, and Odysseus became larger-than-life characters whose actions spoke to the values and struggles of the Greeks. These tales were passed down through generations, becoming a source of inspiration for future poets, philosophers, and artists. For the Romans, the myth of Troy took on even greater significance. In Roman legend, the Trojan prince Aeneas became a hero of national importance. According to Virgil's Aeneid, Aeneas led the surviving Trojans to Italy, where they would eventually establish the foundations of the Roman Empire. This connection between Troy and Rome helped solidify the idea that Rome was the heir to Troy's glory. The Romans saw themselves as the descendants of the Trojans, and their empire was built on the belief that they were fulfilling a divine destiny. The myth of Troy, in this context, was not just a story of loss and tragedy, but one of renewal and rebirth. The legacy of Troy, in Roman eyes, was one of resilience, of a people who, even in the face of destruction, found a way to rise again and create something new. Troy's influence can also be seen in the realm of art and culture. Throughout history, artists, writers, and thinkers have drawn inspiration from the stories of Troy. The themes of love, betrayal, war, and heroism resonated with people across time and space, offering a mirror to the struggles of their own lives. From ancient Greek pottery depicting scenes from the Trojan War to Renaissance paintings that brought the heroes of Troy to life, the city's story continued to be a powerful source of creativity. Even in the modern era, the myth of Troy has inspired countless adaptations in literature, theater, and film, ensuring that its legacy endures to this day. In addition to its influence on literature and art, Troy's legacy also had a profound impact on the way later civilizations understood the concept of power. Troy, at its height, was a symbol of military might and cultural sophistication. Its fall, however, served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of overconfidence and hubris. The Trojans, in their pride and belief in the invincibility of their city, underestimated the determination and ingenuity of their enemies. The Greeks, though initially stalled by the city's formidable walls, eventually triumphed not through brute force but through clever strategy and deception. The lesson here was clear: power, no matter how great, is always vulnerable to the unseen forces of fate, and it can be undone by a single moment of miscalculation. Troy's fall also taught future civilizations about the fragility of peace. The Trojan War, sparked by a single act of betrayal, the abduction of Helen, became a lesson in how seemingly small actions can spiral into catastrophic consequences. The Greeks, in their pursuit of revenge, lost countless lives and resources, and the Trojans, in their defense of their city, were ultimately destroyed. The tragedy of Troy was not just about the destruction of a city, but the destruction of lives, relationships, and cultures. It served as a reminder of how easily peace can be shattered by pride, jealousy, and the desires of powerful individuals. Even as Troy's story continued to inspire and inform the cultures that came after it, the city itself remained a mystery for centuries. The true location of Troy was lost to history, and its story faded into myth and legend. It was only in the 19th century, with the efforts of archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, that the ruins of the ancient city were rediscovered at Hazarlik in modern-day Turkey. Schliemann's excavation of the site uncovered layers of ruins that corresponded to the descriptions found in the ancient texts, sparking renewed interest in Troy's historical existence. While the exact events of the Trojan War may never be fully understood, the discovery of Troy's ruins confirmed that there had indeed been a city that bore the name, and that its story was far more than just myth. The excavation of Troy brought new insights into the city's history, revealing a complex and sophisticated civilization that had once thrived in the ancient world. The ruins of Troy, though largely in ruins, stand as a testament to the resilience of a people who once inhabited the city. Their story, as fragmented as it may be, continues to captivate historians and archaeologists who are still piecing together the puzzle of Troy's past. What we know for certain is that Troy was a city of great significance, its impact stretching far beyond its destruction. In this chapter, we have explored how Troy's legacy lived on, influencing both the cultures that followed and the way later civilizations understood power, war, and fate. The myths of Troy were not just stories of a lost civilization, they were lessons about the fragility of human endeavors, the dangers of hubris, and the lasting impact of war. Troy's story continues to resonate today, serving as a reminder that the past, no matter how distant, still has much to teach us about the present. The city of Troy may have fallen, but its spirit lives on in the stories, the art, and the lessons that have been passed down through the ages. As time passed, the echoes of Troy's fall continued to resonate throughout the ancient world. Its story became a touchstone for later civilizations, and its influence was felt not just in the literature, art, and culture of Greece and Rome but in the broader themes of human ambition, pride, and fragility. The fall of Troy, however, was not simply a lesson in the vulnerability of even the greatest of cities. It also carried within it the seeds of internal conflict that had plagued Troy long before the Greeks ever set foot on its shores. For all of Troy's outward power, there were signs of cracks within the city long before its ultimate destruction. The city's internal strife, brought about by jealousy, infighting, and overconfidence, began to eat away at its unity, setting the stage for its eventual downfall. Though the Trojans were united in their resistance to foreign invaders, they were far from united within their own walls. The royal family, for instance, was not a harmonious group. Priam, despite his wisdom and leadership, could not escape the undercurrents of familial discord. His sons, Hector and Paris, though both great figures in their own right, were not always in agreement with each other, and their differing approaches to leadership and warfare created tension. Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy, believed in the honor of battle, fighting not just to protect his home but for the glory of his people. He was a man of duty, one who valued the strength of his people above all else. His sense of responsibility made him a respected figure among the Trojans, but it also meant that he often found himself at odds with others in the royal court, particularly his brother Paris. Paris, on the other hand, was less concerned with glory in battle than with personal gain and love. His role in the Trojan War, sparked by his affair with Helen, was one of the most controversial and divisive aspects of the city's internal struggles. While Hector led his men into battle, Paris remained a figure of controversy, seen by many as the cause of the war that threatened to destroy Troy. This discord within the royal family reflected a larger problem within Troy itself. The city's leadership, while strong and capable, was divided by personal ambition, pride, and conflicting desires. As the war dragged on, the leadership's ability to unify the people of Troy began to falter. Even as the Trojans fought bravely to defend their city, their internal divisions made it harder for them to present a united front against the invading Greeks. The gods, too, played a role in this division, for they, too, were divided in their allegiances. While some gods, like Apollo, supported the Trojans, others, such as Hera and Athena, sided with the Greeks. This divine intervention added yet another layer of complexity to the conflict, as the Trojans found themselves fighting not only their human enemies but also the capricious will of the gods. The once impenetrable walls of Troy, which had been built to protect the city from external threats, were now symbolic of the city's internal weaknesses. While they shielded Troy from Greek forces for years, they also acted as a physical reminder of the city's failure to address the cracks within its own leadership and society. The Trojans, for all their might, could not overcome the divisions that lay at the heart of their civilization. And while the gods may have once smiled upon Troy, they, too, grew increasingly distant as the city's internal strife deepened. As the war continued, the Trojans faced a growing sense of isolation. Their once proud alliances with neighboring civilizations began to fray. The Greeks, unified under the leadership of Agamemnon, pressed on, while the Trojans found themselves increasingly outnumbered and outmatched. The inability of Troy's leadership to address the growing divisions within the city left them vulnerable to the ingenuity and persistence of their enemies. The Greeks, though initially stalled by Troy's strong defenses, were relentless in their efforts to break the city's will. They, too, recognized the internal weaknesses within Troy and sought to exploit them, knowing that a divided enemy is an enemy more easily defeated. The internal struggles of Troy were not just political, they were also reflected in the daily lives of its citizens. The once vibrant city, known for its artistry, culture, and sophistication, began to feel the effects of war and siege. The markets, once bustling with trade and commerce, grew quieter as supplies dwindled. The craftsmen and artisans who had once created beautiful works of art now focused their efforts on the defense of the city, leaving their artistry behind. The people of Troy, once proud of their cultural achievements, now found themselves consumed by the war, their lives reduced to survival and defense. The sense of hope and unity that had once defined Troy was replaced by a growing sense of despair, as the city's resources were stretched thin and the toll of the war became ever more apparent. The cracks within Troy's society became impossible to ignore. The people, once united by a shared purpose and a common cause, began to splinter. The tensions between the royal family, the generals, and the common citizens grew as the war dragged on. It was no longer just the Greeks outside the walls that threatened Troy, it was the internal divisions that were eroding the city from within. The heroes who had once stood as symbols of Troy's strength, Hector, Priam, and others, could not prevent the city from falling into disarray. Even the gods, who had once protected Troy, seemed to have turned their backs on it. The fall of Troy, in many ways, was not just a result of external forces. It was the culmination of years of internal strife, pride, and division. The Trojans, for all their might, were ultimately undone by the very flaws that had once made them great. The pride of the royal family, the arrogance of its leaders, and the growing rift between the different factions within Troy weakened the city from within, making it vulnerable to the cunning and persistence of its enemies. The once great civilization, brought low by internal discord, was ultimately consumed by the very forces that had once defined it. In this chapter, we have seen how the internal divisions within Troy, from the royal family to the common people, contributed to the city's downfall. The leadership struggles, the growing rifts between the Trojans, and the inability to unite in the face of external threats ultimately left Troy vulnerable. The external siege, while brutal, was only one part of the story. The internal struggles within the city proved to be just as significant, as Troy's once unified spirit was slowly chipped away by pride, ambition, and discord. The Trojan War was not only a battle between two mighty civilizations but also a struggle against forces that could not be seen or controlled. While the Trojans faced pressure from external enemies, the Greeks, led by kings such as Agamemnon and Achilles, they also had to contend with threats far beyond the reach of human weapons. Natural disasters, plagues, and the capricious interventions of the gods played a significant role in destabilizing Troy and weakening its resolve. As the war continued, it became clear that the Trojans were not only fighting to protect their city but were also at the mercy of forces that could not be reasoned with or defeated through strength alone. The gods, who had once blessed Troy and its people, were now divided in their loyalties, their influence over the war growing ever stronger. The Trojans, once under the favor of gods like Apollo and Aphrodite, found themselves opposed by a host of divine figures, including Hera, Athena, and Poseidon, who supported the Greek cause. The intervention of the gods in the Trojan War was not a simple matter of divine will but rather a complex tapestry of personal vendettas, rivalries, and power struggles. The gods, with their immense power, could alter the course of battles, bring about unexpected victories, or deliver crushing blows to the Trojans when they least expected it. One of the most powerful interventions came from Apollo, who was a strong supporter of Troy. Apollo's favor was crucial to the Trojan army's ability to hold the line against the Greeks. However, the gods' favor was never guaranteed, and as the war wore on, the gods' attention shifted away from the Trojans. The changing allegiances among the divine beings reflected the fickle nature of the gods themselves and underscored the vulnerability of Troy. Despite the godly support that Troy once enjoyed, the gods began to grow more distant, leaving the Trojans without the divine protection they had come to rely upon. The gods, in their shifting allegiances, created an ever-growing sense of uncertainty, not just among the Trojans but within the very fabric of their society. In addition to the divine turmoil, natural disasters and plagues also struck Troy during the war, further compounding the suffering and despair of its people. A deadly plague, believed to have been sent by Apollo, ravaged the Trojan forces, decimating their ranks at a time when they could least afford it. The plague, which killed countless soldiers and civilians, was a physical manifestation of the gods' anger and the capriciousness of fate. The Trojans, already struggling to defend their city from the Greek forces, now found themselves battling an invisible enemy, an enemy they could neither understand nor combat. This plague, along with other natural calamities, served as a reminder that the Trojans were powerless in the face of forces far beyond their control. But even in the face of these trials, the Trojans held on. They continued to fight with everything they had, their spirits unbroken despite the mounting odds. The warriors of Troy, led by the indomitable Hector, fought with bravery and honor, their resolve strengthened by the belief that their cause was just. They faced the Greek forces, who were relentless in their pursuit of victory, but the Trojans were determined to defend their homeland, no matter the cost. The gods, however, had other plans. As the war dragged on, the Trojans found themselves increasingly isolated, both from the gods they had once trusted and from the allies they had once counted on. The forces that had once protected Troy were now either absent or turned against them. The Greek forces, led by the cunning Odysseus, recognized the Trojans' vulnerability and sought to exploit it. They realized that while the Trojans were strong, they were not invincible. The Trojans, isolated and divided, were no longer able to stand against the coordinated might of the Greek forces. The Greeks, in their relentless pursuit of Troy, began to recognize that victory would not come solely from brute strength. The Trojan War had reached a turning point, and the Greeks understood that the key to victory lay in deception and strategy. The most famous of these strategies was the Greek use of a wooden horse. The Greeks, exhausted by years of siege and realizing that they could not break Troy's walls through force alone, devised a plan so devious that it would become the cornerstone of their victory. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to conceal a small group of soldiers. They then left the horse at the gates of Troy, pretending to retreat. The Trojans, exhausted and hopeful that the war was finally over, brought the horse into the city as a symbol of peace and victory. What the Trojans did not know was that inside the horse, Greek warriors lay in wait. That night, when the Trojans had celebrated their apparent victory, the Greek soldiers emerged, opened the gates of the city, and allowed the Greek army to pour in. The walls of Troy, so carefully constructed to protect the city, now became a symbol of its downfall. The Trojans, for all their strength and resilience, had been undone not by force, but by trickery. The fall of Troy was not just the collapse of a city, it was the final act of a war in which the gods, the elements, and the cunning of the Greeks all played their parts. The Trojans, despite their valor and determination, could not withstand the combined weight of divine interference, disease, and deceit. The gods, once their protectors, had turned against them, leaving Troy vulnerable to the forces of fate. The Greeks, having worn down the Trojans through years of siege and clever manipulation, ultimately succeeded in their conquest, taking the city and ending its reign as a major power in the ancient world. Troy's defeat, though tragic, served as a reminder that the ancient world was governed not just by military might but by the whims of the gods, the unpredictability of nature, and the dangers of human pride. The Trojans, in their belief that their city was invincible, had underestimated the forces that could bring them down. Their downfall was not a result of a lack of courage or strength, but of an inability to adapt to the changing tides of fate. The fall of Troy was the culmination of a series of internal and external challenges that no amount of heroism or fortitude could overcome. In this chapter, we have seen how external challenges, from divine intervention to natural disasters, played a critical role in the downfall of Troy. Despite their military strength and determination, the Trojans were caught in a web of forces beyond their control, and it was these forces, combined with the cunning of the Greeks, that led to the city's eventual collapse. The fall of Troy was not just the result of one siege or one battle, it was the culmination of a long series of events that unfolded over time, each one contributing to the city's tragic end. The turning point in the Trojan War was inevitable, though no one could predict exactly when or how it would come. The years of fighting had worn both the Trojans and the Greeks thin, but it was the Greek determination to end the war at all costs that would ultimately lead to the collapse of Troy. Despite the Greeks' prolonged siege and seemingly endless efforts to breach the city's mighty walls, it became clear that Troy could not be overtaken by force alone. The city had resisted all attempts at invasion, and its walls, as legendary as the heroes who defended them, stood strong against the onslaught of Greek warriors. However, it was not the strength of the Trojans that sealed their fate, nor was it the power of the gods that decided the outcome. It was a single moment of deceit and cunning, a strategy so audacious that it would become one of the most famous tales of trickery in history. The Greeks, who had fought for nearly 10 years to bring down Troy, were desperate. The siege had stretched on without any real victory, and the cost of war had begun to take its toll. Supplies were running low, morale was weakening, and the Greek soldiers, who had once fought with the conviction of righteous anger, were now worn down by the years of bloodshed and exhaustion. The gods, too, seemed to have turned their favor away from the Greeks. The Trojans, despite their internal divisions, still stood strong, united in their belief that they could resist the Greeks and protect their city. But the Greeks were not finished yet, and the final chapter of the war would come not through open confrontation, but through a masterstroke of cunning strategy. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca and one of the most clever of the Greek leaders, devised a plan that would bring the Greeks victory where force had failed. The Greeks had tried for years to breach the walls of Troy, but they could not overcome its defenses. The idea of attacking directly had failed, and so Odysseus turned to deception as the final weapon in their arsenal. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, hollowed out to conceal a small group of elite warriors. This horse, the size of a small building, would be left at the gates of Troy as a supposed offering to the gods, a token of peace and surrender. The Greeks pretended to leave, taking most of their forces with them, leaving only a small group of soldiers hidden inside the horse. When the Trojans saw the Greeks departing, they believed that they had finally won. The long siege, the constant threat of attack, and the years of battle had worn down their spirit, and the Trojans were eager to believe that the war was over. The Greeks, they thought, had given up. The Trojans celebrated what they assumed was their victory, bringing the wooden horse into their city as a symbol of peace. Some of the Trojans even offered sacrifices, giving thanks to the gods for their apparent triumph. But that night, when the Trojans had fallen into a deep sleep, the Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse emerged and opened the gates of the city. The Greeks, who had pretended to leave, had secretly returned, and with them came an army of warriors who poured into Troy, overwhelming the unsuspecting defenders. The betrayal of the wooden horse became a pivotal moment in the Trojan War. The once great city of Troy, which had withstood so much over the years, was now vulnerable to the most treacherous form of attack, deception. The Trojans, too trusting and too eager to believe in their victory, had let their guard down at the very moment they should have been most vigilant. The walls that had protected Troy for so long now became the means of its destruction. Once the gates were opened, the Greek forces flooded into the city, killing or capturing those who had not already been slain in battle. The fall of Troy, brought about by the Greek stratagem, was swift and brutal. The Trojans, who had fought so valiantly for so long, were now at the mercy of their enemies. The great city, with its towering walls and palaces, was sacked and burned. Priam, the noble king of Troy, was killed, and his royal family was either slaughtered or taken captive. Hector, the greatest warrior of Troy, had already fallen, and now it was the turn of the rest of the city's defenders. The Trojans, despite their courage and resolve, had been undone not by the might of the Greeks, but by their own moment of trust and pride. The Greeks, having won the war through deception, carried off their spoils and returned home, leaving the city of Troy in ruins. The immediate aftermath of the fall of Troy was one of devastation. The once proud city, filled with life and culture, was reduced to a smoking heap of ruins. The streets were littered with the bodies of the slain, and the cries of the survivors echoed through the silence of the destroyed city. The once great walls of Troy, which had stood as a symbol of strength and resilience, now lay in ruin. The Trojans, who had believed in the invincibility of their city, had seen their entire way of life crumble in a single night. The gods, who had once been their protectors, seemed indifferent to their fate, leaving the Trojans to face their destruction alone. For the Greeks, the fall of Troy marked the end of a long and bloody war. Though they had achieved their victory, it came at a great cost. The Greeks, having sacked the city, were now burdened with the weight of their actions. The gods, who had played such a significant role in the conflict, were not pleased with the Greeks' triumph. For Odysseus, the mastermind behind the cunning plan, the journey home would be fraught with difficulties. The Odyssey would recount the tale of his long and perilous voyage, as the gods, angered by the Greeks' actions, made their journey back home a long and treacherous one. The victory, though hard-earned, was not without its consequences. The Trojan War, once a conflict driven by love, pride, and revenge, had come to its tragic conclusion. Troy, once a shining beacon of civilization, lay in ruin, its people scattered or destroyed. The war that had begun with a simple act of betrayal, the abduction of Helen, had ended with the complete destruction of a great city. The fall of Troy was the culmination of years of conflict, and it became a symbol of the dangers of pride, the fragility of empires, and the inevitability of fate. The heroes of the war, like Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus, would be remembered for their deeds, but the city of Troy, once the jewel of the ancient world, would be reduced to legend. In this chapter, we have seen the decisive turning point of the Trojan War, where Greek cunning and deception ultimately brought down the walls of Troy. The city, for all its strength and resilience, was undone by a moment of trust and pride, and the once great civilization was destroyed in a single night. The fall of Troy was swift and brutal, but its legacy endured, shaping the world for generations to come. The night that Troy burned marked the end of an age. Smoke rose into the dark sky like a final prayer, twisting into the heavens as if trying to reach the gods who had watched in silence. The cries of the dying filled the air, echoing through the streets that had once known music, laughter, and the rhythm of daily life. In the heart of the chaos stood King Priam, aged and broken, clutching the last remnants of his city's dignity. His crown was gone, his throne overturned, yet even in his final moments, there was a kind of tragic majesty about him, the dignity of a man who understood that his city's fall had already been written by fate. When Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, found him, the old king did not plead for mercy. He knew mercy was a language long forgotten in war. With one final blow, Priam fell upon the altar of Zeus, his blood mingling with the ashes of Troy's temples. The last king of a great civilization died not as a ruler, but as a symbol, the end of an era that could never return. The palace that had once gleamed with gold and marble was now nothing more than rubble and smoke. Queen Hecuba, once the proud mother of many princes, was dragged away in chains, her cries carried through the night. The royal daughters, Cassandra among them, suffered fates that reflected the cruelty of war. Cassandra, blessed and cursed with prophecy, had warned them all of this destruction. She had seen the flames, the deaths, the betrayal, but no one had believed her. Her curse had been the cruelest of all, to see the truth but never be heard. When the Greeks took her as a prize, she looked back at the burning ruins of her home, her eyes hollow yet defiant, as though she had known all along that Troy's destiny was to burn. Among the survivors, there was confusion and disbelief. Some fled into the countryside, seeking refuge among the ruins, while others were captured and enslaved. The proud warriors who had once stood atop Troy's walls, who had faced down the greatest heroes of Greece, were now gone. Hector's body, once dragged around the walls by Achilles, had long been buried with honor. Paris was dead, his arrow having struck Achilles' heel but not saving his city. And now, even the might of the Greeks felt hollow amid the destruction they had wrought. The spoils of Troy were theirs, but in that moment of triumph, the Greeks found no peace. For in the fire that consumed Troy, something sacred was lost, an understanding that the world would never again be as it had been before the war. The Greeks, triumphant yet weary, began their preparations to leave the ruins behind. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and the cries of captives. The plundered treasures of Troy were loaded onto ships, gold, jewels, and artifacts that had once adorned temples and palaces. But the gods, ever watchful, were not finished with the Greeks. The sea, which had once carried them to Troy, would now become their punishment. One by one, the ships that left the burning coast met with storms, shipwrecks, and divine vengeance. Poseidon, angered by the desecration of his temples, struck many of the fleets with waves so fierce that even the greatest sailors could not withstand them. Few of the Greek heroes returned home unscathed. Agamemnon, the mighty commander, was murdered by his wife upon his return. Ajax was struck down by the gods for his cruelty. Even Odysseus, the cleverest of them all, would wander the seas for 10 years, his journey home fraught with peril and sorrow. For the Trojans who remained, life after the fall was one of endless wandering. Among them was Aeneas, a prince of Troy and a man of destiny. Carrying his aged father, Anchises, upon his back, and leading his young son by the hand, Aeneas fled the burning city. His wife, Creusa, was lost in the chaos, her voice calling out to him through the smoke before fading into silence. Aeneas and a small band of survivors sailed away, guided by the whispers of the gods and the hope of a new beginning. His journey, immortalized centuries later in Virgil's Aeneid, would lead him to the shores of Italy, where his descendants would found a new empire, Rome. Through Aeneas, the spirit of Troy lived on, not as a memory of defeat, but as a promise of renewal. In the ashes of Troy, legends were born. The story of the Trojan War became more than history, it became myth, a timeless tale of love, pride, and the inexorable hand of fate. The gods had used mortals as pawns, their rivalries reflected in human suffering. The heroes of the war, Achilles, Hector, Paris, and Odysseus, became immortal in song and story, their deeds celebrated long after their bones had turned to dust. But behind the poetry and the legend lay a deeper truth: the war had consumed not just men and cities, but ideals. Honor, glory, and vengeance had brought only ruin. The flames of Troy had illuminated the cost of human ambition, a cost that every generation would one day pay again in its own wars and tragedies. The ruins of Troy stood for centuries as a silent witness to this truth. The walls, though broken, still whispered of the city's greatness. Travelers who came upon the site could still see traces of its splendor, the foundations of palaces, fragments of pottery, and the remnants of its once mighty gates. With each passing age, new civilizations rose and fell upon the same soil, their lives layered upon the ruins of the old. Troy, once the heart of a thriving empire, became a place of legend, a name spoken in reverence and awe. It was said that when the wind passed over the plains of Hazarlik, one could still hear the faint echoes of battle cries and the weeping of its fallen people. Yet, for all its destruction, Troy's story endured because it spoke to something timeless in the human spirit. It was not merely a tale of loss, it was a reminder of how easily greatness can be undone, and how even in ruin, the memory of what was once noble can survive. The fall of Troy was not the end, but the beginning of a story that would inspire countless generations. The ashes of the city became the soil from which new civilizations would grow, and its legacy lived on through art, literature, and the enduring desire of humanity to understand the past and its lessons. In this chapter, we have witnessed the immediate aftermath of Troy's destruction, the fall of its king, the suffering of its people, and the fate of both the victors and the vanquished. The end of Troy marked the end of an age, but it also marked the birth of legend. From the ashes of the fallen city rose stories that would outlast empires, carrying with them the eternal reminder that no civilization, no matter how mighty, is beyond the reach of time and fate. The fall of Troy was not the end of its story, but the beginning of a legend that would echo through the ages. Though the city itself was reduced to ruins, its influence continued to shape the world, and the unanswered questions surrounding its destruction became a mystery that would captivate minds for centuries. The ruins of Troy stood as silent witnesses to a past that could never fully be understood. Scholars, historians, and adventurers alike would journey to the site in search of answers, piecing together the fragments of a lost civilization. But for all the evidence unearthed, the most important questions about Troy's fall remained elusive. Was the Trojan War truly the result of the gods' quarrels, or was it a war born of human pride, love, and vengeance? Did the gods truly favor the Trojans or the Greeks, or were they simply manipulating mortals for their own amusement? Could Troy have survived if its leadership had been united, or was its downfall inevitable, shaped by the flaws of its people and their overconfidence in their own invincibility? These questions lingered long after the fall of the city, for they were not just questions about Troy's past but about the nature of war, fate, and the human condition. Archaeologists and historians have spent centuries trying to uncover the truth behind Troy's destruction. The ruins of the ancient city, located at Azarlık in modern-day Turkey, offer tantalizing clues about the civilization that once thrived there. Excavations have revealed a city that was more advanced than many had originally believed. Its walls, once thought to be a myth, were real, and its foundations were laid upon centuries of history. Yet, despite the impressive nature of these discoveries, the question of what really happened to Troy remains open to interpretation. Some scholars argue that the story of Troy's fall is purely mythological, a tale woven by poets to explain the inevitable destruction of a great city. They point to the inconsistencies in the various versions of the story and the supernatural elements, the gods, the prophecies, and the divine interventions, as evidence that the Trojan War was a literary construct rather than a historical event. Others believe that Troy was a real city, and that the war, while perhaps exaggerated in the telling, was based on a genuine conflict between two powerful civilizations. Archaeological findings suggest that Troy was indeed destroyed around the time the Trojan War is said to have taken place, but the exact cause of its fall remains unknown. Was it the result of a long siege, a foreign invasion, or a combination of factors? And did the Greeks really use a wooden horse to infiltrate the city, or was this merely a poetic embellishment? The mysteries surrounding Troy have only deepened over time, as scholars continue to debate the true nature of the city's downfall. Some believe that the Trojan horse, that iconic symbol of deceit, was simply a metaphor for the treachery and cunning that led to Troy's destruction. Others point to the possibility that the Greeks may have used other methods, such as underground tunnels or surprise attacks, to breach Troy's walls. The truth remains elusive, and the legend endures, leading the world to wonder what really happened to the city that once stood at the crossroads of civilizations. Troy's enduring influence, however, lies not just in its physical ruins or its historical significance, but in the way its story has shaped culture, language, and identity. The Trojan War has inspired countless works of literature, from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey to Virgil's Aeneid and beyond. The story of Achilles, Hector, and the fateful choice of Paris has become ingrained in Western culture, representing the timeless themes of honor, betrayal, and the consequences of war. The Trojan War serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of civilization, the capriciousness of fate, and the human desire to create lasting legacies, even in the face of destruction. In the centuries that followed the fall of Troy, the memory of the city lived on in myth and legend, becoming a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. The city's destruction became a cautionary tale, warning future generations of the dangers of pride, hubris, and the belief that any civilization is invincible. The gods, once protectors, now stood as silent observers, leading the Trojans to face the consequences of their actions alone. Troy's story became a reflection of the human condition, reminding us that even the greatest of civilizations can fall, and that the legacy of those who have been lost can endure long after their time has passed. The lasting impact of Troy is felt in more than just its historical and literary contributions. Its story has shaped the way we understand the world, influencing the development of Western thought and culture. The heroes of Troy, from Hector and Achilles to Aeneas and Paris, have become archetypes in literature, representing the complexities of human nature, the nobility of sacrifice, the bitterness of vengeance, and the tragic consequences of love and war. The myth of Troy continues to be a source of inspiration for writers, artists, and thinkers, its themes as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. Troy's legacy also endures through the artifacts and ruins that have been uncovered over the years. The discovery of Troy's ancient city at Azarlık has provided scholars with invaluable insights into the culture, technology, and daily life of the Trojans. The ruins, with their layers of history and their imposing walls, stand as a testament to the city's greatness, even in its final moments. The artifacts found in the ancient city, pottery, weapons, sculptures, speak of a civilization that was both advanced and sophisticated, one that left an indelible mark on the ancient world. Despite the passage of time, the mysteries of Troy continue to captivate us. The questions that remain unanswered, the contradictions that persist, only add to the allure of the city's story. Was the Trojan War a real event, or a mythological tale spun by poets and storytellers? Did the Greeks truly use a wooden horse to deceive the Trojans, or was this merely a symbol of the cunning that led to their downfall? The answers may never be known, but the questions will continue to inspire curiosity and wonder. The myth of Troy is timeless, its legacy etched in the stones of history and in the stories that have been passed down through the generations. In this chapter, we have explored the lost mysteries of Troy, the unanswered questions that surround its fall, and the enduring legacy of the city. Though Troy was destroyed, its story has lived on, shaping the way we view the past, the present, and the future. The ruins of Troy stand as a silent reminder of a civilization that once stood at the peak of power and influence, and the mystery of its fall continues to captivate the imagination of people around the world. As long as we continue to ask questions, to seek answers, the memory of Troy will never fade. The centuries that followed the fall of Troy saw the city transform from a symbol of grandeur and defeat into a mythological icon. Its destruction, though tragic and violent, became a catalyst for reflection, teaching later generations about the fragility of power, the importance of unity, and the costs of pride and betrayal. Troy's story, forever intertwined with the actions of its heroes and the interference of gods, carried with it a deeper message. The rise and fall of civilizations is not just a matter of military might, but of internal strength, the wisdom of leadership, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Even as the city lay in ruins, its memory lived on. The Trojans had fought valiantly and held their ground for as long as they could, but in the end, they were undone by the very traits that had once made them great. Their leadership, though wise and noble in many ways, was fractured by personal conflict and ambition. The Trojans' belief in their invincibility, their pride in their cities' impenetrable walls, left them vulnerable when the external threats shifted into cunning subterfuge. The Trojan War itself, while sparked by love and jealousy, grew into a battle of survival, one that ultimately pitted human ambition against divine whimsy. The lessons of Troy were not just confined to the military strategies and tactics used in the war, they extended into the heart of Troy's own culture, politics, and belief systems. The Trojans' dependence on the favor of the gods, and their willingness to place their trust in divine intervention, showed the inherent dangers of over-reliance on forces that could not be controlled. The gods, after all, were not impartial beings, they were fickle, driven by their own desires, allegiances, and grievances. Their intervention in the war, swaying the fates of men and the outcomes of battles, showed that even the most well-constructed plans and the bravest of hearts could fall victim to forces beyond mortal comprehension. This conflict between divine power and human agency formed the crux of Troy's downfall, highlighting the delicate balance between fate and free will. The fall of Troy, in the grand tapestry of history, also represents the cyclical nature of human civilization. The city, once a thriving and prosperous center of culture and influence, was reduced to ashes by the very forces that had once been instrumental in its success. The Trojan War, which had been fought with the purpose of preserving Troy's honor and sovereignty, ultimately left the city vulnerable to the very forces it had once controlled: pride, internal division, and overconfidence. Troy's tragic end would be mirrored throughout history by countless other civilizations that rose to prominence, only to fall due to similar failings. What makes the story of Troy particularly poignant is that it was not just a physical battle, it was also a philosophical one. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans, fueled by love, revenge, and the will of the gods, raised fundamental questions about human nature and the nature of power itself. Was it right to go to war over the abduction of a woman, as Paris had done? What of the power of the gods? Could the mortals ever truly shape their own destinies, or were they merely pawns in a divine game? And if a city as mighty as Troy could fall, what hope was there for any civilization? Troy's legacy, then, was not merely one of military defeat. It was a cautionary tale for future generations, a story about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the fickleness of fate, and the ever-present possibility of downfall. The story of Troy has resonated throughout the ages, becoming a touchstone for later civilizations. The Greeks, who had once been its enemies, would later adopt Troy's story into their own mythological tradition. The Romans, who believed they were descended from the Trojans, would carry the memory of Troy with them as they established their own empire. Even today, the story of Troy continues to influence art, literature, and culture, as its lessons about the transient nature of power and the fragility of human greatness remain relevant. The ruins of Troy, though silent now, continue to be a powerful symbol of this enduring legacy. Archaeological discoveries in the modern era have revealed that Troy was, indeed, a real city, though its destruction has become woven into the fabric of myth. Heinrich Schliemann's excavations in the 19th century confirmed the existence of Troy at Azarlik, and the layers of ruins uncovered there told the story of a civilization that had lived, prospered, and eventually perished. Today, the ruins stand as a reminder of the once great city, offering a glimpse into the lives of those who lived there and a powerful reflection of how their story continues to echo across millennia. But even as the city was destroyed, the idea of Troy lived on. Its legacy, carried through the works of Homer, Virgil, and countless other poets, became a defining element of Western cultural heritage. The Trojan War, and the heroes it produced, Achilles, Hector, Aeneas, Paris, became the archetypes of heroism, tragedy, and the inevitable clash between fate and free will. The themes of love, loss, and sacrifice explored in the Iliad and the Aeneid resonated across centuries, influencing not just literature but philosophy, politics, and art. In the end, the fall of Troy was not just the collapse of a city, but the collapse of an entire worldview, a worldview centered around the belief that greatness could be achieved through military might, divine favor, and unyielding pride. The Trojans, for all their valor and determination, were ultimately undone by the very same qualities that had allowed them to flourish. Their story serves as a timeless reminder of the fragility of even the greatest empires, and of how, no matter how mighty a civilization may be, it is always vulnerable to the forces of fate, pride, and internal division. In this chapter, we have reflected on the broader legacy of Troy, the lessons it imparts about power, pride, and fate. Though Troy was destroyed, its story lives on, shaping the way we think about civilization, war, and the cycles of history. The ruins of Troy may be silent now, but the echoes of its past continue to resonate, offering both a cautionary tale and a reminder that no civilization, no matter how great, is ever truly invulnerable. The lasting legacy of Troy, both in myth and reality, has left behind more questions than answers, adding to the mystique and allure of the ancient city. The ruins of Troy, though extensively excavated, have not revealed all the secrets they hold. Archaeologists, historians, and scholars have spent years trying to piece together the story of Troy's rise, its glory, and its ultimate destruction, but even the most thorough studies leave gaps in the narrative. What truly happened during the Trojan War? Was it as the ancient texts describe, or were there other forces at play? Did the gods really intervene in the lives of the Trojans, or was the entire saga a product of human ambition and rivalry? The mystery of Troy's fall, like the city itself, has left an indelible mark on history. While much has been discovered, much more remains unanswered. Was the war really sparked by Paris' abduction of Helen, or were there deeper political and economic factors at play? Some scholars suggest that Troy's strategic location, controlling the vital trade routes between the Aegean and the Black Sea, may have made it a target for the Greeks, who sought to dominate the region. Others believe that the war was a reflection of a broader cultural clash, with the Greeks seeking to expand their influence while the Trojans stood as a symbol of resistance. This theory posits that the war may have been more about territorial and economic dominance than a personal feud over Helen. However, the true causes of the Trojan War remain as elusive as the city itself. The most famous aspect of Troy's destruction, the use of the Trojan horse, has also been subject to intense scrutiny. Was the wooden horse, as described in Homer's Iliad and later in Virgil's Aeneid, a real tactic used by the Greeks, or is it merely a symbol for the cunning strategies employed by the Greek forces? Some historians argue that the horse was a poetic metaphor for the deceit and subterfuge involved in Troy's fall, while others point to evidence of Greek siege tactics that may have involved hidden troops or underground passages. The story of the horse has captivated audiences for centuries, but as with so much about Troy, the truth remains obscured by time and myth. Equally mysterious is the role of the gods in the Trojan War. Were the gods truly involved in the conflict, or were their actions simply projections of the emotions and desires of the people who told the story? The gods' interventions, whether helping or hindering the Trojans and Greeks, have long been interpreted as reflections of human nature, jealousy, revenge, love, and pride. Yet, for the Trojans, the gods' shifting allegiances often seem to be their undoing. Why did Apollo, who once aided them, turn against them? Why did Athena and Hera align with the Greeks, leading them to victory? These divine interventions raise fundamental questions about the nature of power, control, and fate, and whether human beings are ever truly free to determine their own destinies. Troy's mysteries extend beyond the war itself. The question of why the city was abandoned or destroyed after its fall also remains unanswered. Some theories suggest that after the sack of the city, the Trojans who survived may have migrated to other regions, founding new cities or becoming part of the population of neighboring civilizations. Others propose that the city's fall was followed by a slow decline, with the once great metropolis losing its former glory and importance over time. Excavations have uncovered evidence of multiple layers of destruction, suggesting that Troy was rebuilt and abandoned several times throughout its history. This raises the question of whether Troy's final destruction was truly the result of Greek invasion, or whether it was the culmination of years of internal decay and external pressures. The enduring fascination with Troy can also be seen in the countless theories and speculations that have arisen over the centuries. From the romanticized version of the war in ancient literature to the modern-day attempts to reconstruct its history through archaeology, the city has become a symbol of human ambition, triumph, and tragedy. Troy, as both a historical and mythological entity, represents the timeless struggle between human desire and the forces of fate. It is a city that, despite its ultimate destruction, continues to inspire and provoke thought, drawing people from all over the world to uncover its secrets. In the modern era, Troy's ruins have become a symbol of human resilience. The site, though battered by time and the elements, still stands as a testament to the endurance of human achievement. The artifacts and structures uncovered at Archaeological have provided a glimpse into the lives of the Trojans, their culture, and their advanced technological and artistic accomplishments. The city, which once stood as a beacon of wealth, power, and culture, now serves as a reminder of the transience of civilizations. The fact that the ruins still attract millions of visitors every year speaks to the ongoing fascination with Troy and the lessons it continues to teach. Despite the passage of time, the unanswered questions about Troy's history remain a driving force for those who seek to understand the past. Was it truly a city of such magnificence that it could inspire a war of such scale? Did the gods truly intervene, or was the war simply a reflection of the ambition and pride of mortals? And what role did the Trojan horse play in the ultimate demise of the city? These questions, like the ruins themselves, persist, waiting for the day when the final answers may be uncovered. As we reflect on the mysteries of Troy, it becomes clear that its legacy is not just a story of destruction, but a tale of the enduring power of myth and memory. Troy may have fallen, but the city's story has lived on for thousands of years. Its influence is felt not just in the stories of ancient Greece and Rome, but in the very ways we think about war, fate, and the complexity of human nature. The fall of Troy is a reminder that even the greatest civilizations are subject to forces beyond their control, and that the lessons of the past are never fully understood until they have been lost. The mystery of Troy is not just a historical question, it is a universal one, asking us to reflect on the nature of our own ambitions, our own pride, and the enduring legacy we leave behind. The legacy of Troy extends far beyond its immediate destruction, echoing through centuries of human history. Its story has shaped the cultures that came after it, influencing the art, literature, and thinking of successive civilizations. While the ruins of the ancient city lie in silence today, its cultural and philosophical impact continues to resonate in the modern world. Troy, as a symbol of human greatness and human fragility, reminds us of the timeless nature of certain truths, the inevitability of loss, the consequences of pride, and the enduring human desire to immortalize our achievements. In many ways, the fall of Troy represents a cycle that humanity is doomed to repeat. Civilizations rise, and they fall, often because of the very qualities that once made them great. In the case of Troy, it was the overconfidence in their own strength, their belief in their divine protection, and the pride that led them to underestimate the cunning of their enemies. These same themes play out in history, whether in the rise and fall of empires, the rise of great cities, or the conflicts between nations. The story of Troy serves as a reminder that no empire is immune to the forces of time and fate, and that pride, while it may bring temporary success, is often a precursor to downfall. In literature, the story of Troy has inspired countless works of art, from Homer's Iliad to Virgil's Aeneid to modern-day films and novels. The figure of the Trojan War, whether as a grand epic or a tragic love story, has continued to capture the imaginations of readers and audiences alike. The themes of honor, love, betrayal, and revenge are as universal today as they were in ancient times. The heroes of Troy, Achilles, Hector, Paris, and Aeneas, remain central figures in our understanding of heroism, tragedy, and the complexity of human nature. Their stories, though rooted in a specific time and place, transcend their historical context, offering lessons that apply to every generation. The figure of Hector, for example, remains a symbol of bravery, duty, and sacrifice. His refusal to abandon his city, even when the odds were overwhelming, makes him one of the most enduring characters in literature. Hector's tragic death, at the hands of Achilles, represents the ultimate cost of war, the loss of the noblest figures in society. It also reflects the deep personal struggles that define human existence, the conflict between personal duty and the collective good, and the sacrifice that often accompanies war. Hector's story, while tragic, underscores the nobility of selflessness, a theme that resonates deeply even in the context of modern conflicts. Paris, the prince whose decision to abduct Helen led to the destruction of Troy, serves as a symbol of the destructive power of desire and passion. His role in the Trojan War is one of moral ambiguity. Paris' actions, motivated by love or lust, lead to the death of countless men and the destruction of his own city. His character offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked desire and the consequences of acting without regard for the greater good. Paris is a figure whose personal flaw, his inability to see beyond his own desires, becomes the fatal flaw of an entire civilization. His actions remind us of the dangers of making decisions that are driven by emotion rather than reason, and the destructive consequences that can follow. Aeneas, on the other hand, represents the theme of survival and rebirth. Though Troy falls, Aeneas' journey is one of renewal. He survives the destruction of his home and leads the survivors to a new land where they will eventually found a great empire, Rome. Aeneas' story is one of hope, of the endurance of the Trojan spirit even in the face of ruin. His journey teaches that from destruction, there can be new beginnings, and from tragedy, there can be triumph. Aeneas is the embodiment of the idea that even in the deepest despair, there is the potential for renewal and a new purpose. He becomes not just a hero for his time, but a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, capable of finding light even in the darkest of times. Troy's influence is also deeply embedded in the founding myths of the Roman Empire. The Romans, who saw themselves as the heirs to Troy, looked back to their Trojan ancestors as a symbol of their own noble origins. Aeneas, as the supposed forefather of the Romans, bridged the gap between Troy's fall and Rome's rise, connecting the two great civilizations. In this sense, Troy lives on not just in myth but in the actual historical narrative of Rome, where the story of Troy's destruction becomes the foundation of Roman identity. Rome, like Troy, would rise to greatness only to fall centuries later, but the cycle of creation and destruction would continue, with each civilization learning from and building upon the past. The lasting power of Troy's legacy is also seen in its impact on philosophy and thought. The Trojan War forced questions of destiny, fate, and the role of the gods in human affairs to the forefront of intellectual debate. Was Troy's fall the result of divine intervention, or was it the product of human folly? To what extent are we as individuals and as societies masters of our own fate? These questions have been at the heart of Western philosophy for millennia, and the story of Troy continues to serve as a reflection on these timeless themes. The gods, who played such an active role in the war, were often seen as capricious and unpredictable, manipulating the fates of mortals for their own purposes. This perspective on the gods' interference has been discussed by countless philosophers, raising questions about free will, the nature of divine power, and the human struggle to find meaning in a seemingly indifferent universe. Finally, the memory of Troy endures because it is a reminder that the past, no matter how distant, is never truly gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the myths we create, and the lessons we carry with us. Troy's destruction was not just an event in history, it was a symbol of the impermanence of human endeavors. The ruins of Troy, now scattered across the plains, are a poignant reminder that all empires, all civilizations, must eventually fall. But in their fall, they leave behind stories that inspire future generations, stories that teach us about the complexities of power, love, war, and the human condition. Troy may have been lost, but its legacy lives on in the myths and the lessons we continue to pass down through the ages. In this chapter, we have explored the lasting impact of Troy's story, how it has shaped cultures, philosophies, and civilizations across the centuries. The fall of Troy was not the end of its legacy, but the beginning of a timeless myth that continues to resonate with people today. Through literature, art, and philosophy, Troy's story remains a powerful reflection of the human spirit, its triumphs, its tragedies, and its enduring quest for meaning. As we come to the end of this journey through Troy's past, we are reminded of the profound impact this ancient city has had on the course of history, myth, and culture. Troy, in all its glory and tragedy, stands as a symbol of what happens when human ambition, love, and pride collide with the whims of fate and the gods. Its rise to power, its enduring heroes, and its eventual fall are timeless reminders that no civilization is invincible, and that even the mightiest empires can be undone by their own flaws. The story of Troy has echoed through the centuries, influencing not only literature and art, but the very way we understand the world. From Homer's Iliad to Virgil's Aeneid, and even in the modern retellings of Troy's tragic end, its themes of war, love, betrayal, and resilience continue to resonate with us. The question of what truly happened to Troy, and why it fell, remains a mystery that continues to captivate historians, philosophers, and storytellers alike. Yet, perhaps the true lesson of Troy is not found in the answers to these questions, but in the questions themselves, the timeless reflections on the fragility of human existence and the cost of our desires. The ruins of Troy, once home to kings and warriors, now stand as silent witnesses to the past. But even in their silence, they speak volumes. They remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of stories, stories that shape us, inspire us, and challenge us to reflect on the world around us. Through Troy's rise and fall, we learn about ourselves, about the nature of power, pride, and fate. And, perhaps most importantly, we learn that the past is never truly gone. It lingers in our stories, in our myths, and in our memories, shaping the present and the future. As we reflect on the lessons of Troy, we are reminded that the greatest civilizations are often those that can learn from the past, adapt, and grow. The story of Troy is not just a tale of war and destruction, but one of resilience, of rebuilding from the ashes, and of the power of myth to endure across time. Though the walls of Troy have fallen, its legacy lives on, not just in the pages of history, but in the hearts and minds of those who continue to tell its story. As we close the book on Troy's story, we invite you to reflect on the lessons it offers about power, fate, and the fleeting nature of glory. What do you think about the mysteries of Troy? Do you believe the city's fall was truly caused by the gods, or was it the result of human pride and ambition? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this journey together and explore the lasting impact of Troy. If you enjoyed this exploration into the heart of one of history's greatest myths, don't forget to like this video and share it with those who also appreciate the timeless lessons of the ancient world. Make sure to subscribe to Sleepy Dungeons for more deep dives into forgotten histories and captivating legends. By subscribing, you'll ensure that you never miss out on our next journey into the past. Until next time, may your night be calm and your dreams filled with light, as you drift peacefully through the echoes of history.